Hello, friends. This is Chandrakant from Akul Mac, and welcome to Legal Matters. Today, we would like to discuss something which happened in the 50s and 60s when the Indian government were taking over the private banks and making them public. And obviously, this was a matter of great discomfort among the private enterprises and business owners who actually owned the bank. And there were a lot of legal battles fought in 50s and 60s. Matter eventually reached the Supreme Court, and there were rulings around it. So, to discuss this particular matter, let me invite my friend from Ahmedabad, Mr. Jeet Bhatt.
Yeah, hello Chandrakant. Thank you for having me in this show, and I'm looking forward for discussing on this very important historical issue with regards to nationalization of the banks. And as today we have come a full circle, as today the government is planning to privatize these nationalized banks. So what happened, how it transpired, are interesting events of the history which I would like to discuss.
Absolutely, Jeet. In fact, you're the best person, and there were rulings also from the Supreme Court. Uh, so I think let's get into the discussion straight away. What happened? What was the reason behind government deciding to take over the private banks in 50s and 60s?
Yes, so basically, Pandit Nehru, the first prime minister of this country, believed that socialism was the best model that suited India after independence, and it wanted state to have control over the important industries, which was seen to as a means to achieve the objective of greatest good for the greatest number of people. And therefore, since 50s, 60s, we see several policies which nationalized important businesses like the transport undertakings, the electricity was made a state monopoly, the insurance sector was nationalized. And similarly, it was also thought that let the banking sector also be nationalized and let the central government run this entire business so that the benefits of banking system reach to the rural people, to the farmers, peasants who require loans and other facilities for the development of the country. So in 1955, the Imperial Bank of India was nationalized and taken over as the State Bank of India. So the present State Bank of India was originally a private bank under the imperial rule of the Commonwealth. And later in the year 1955, it was converted as a State Bank of India, which is today one of the largest banks in this country. The RBI was also set up in 1948, which had control over the entire economic system. And it also wanted to reduce private banks. And from 1951 to 1969, around 566 banks were reduced to 89 in 1969. So basically, the entire program of the government was to have state control over all business and private enterprises. So, with regards to nationalization of banks after Pandit Nehru, Indira Gandhi was at the helm of affairs, and she strongly believed that these banks, the private banks, should also be nationalized. But there were some objections from the old guard, as we know today. There was some tussle between the Indira Gandhi and the her close associates and the old guard. And Morarji Desai was one of the members who was opposing this nationalization of banks because the government would have to pay these banks who are being taken over because the central government would be taking over their assets, their liabilities, their entire undertaking, which will have a lot of assets. So certainly compensation would have to be paid. So Morarji Desai was of the view that if rather than paying these banks, we can utilize that fund for other activities. But the plan of Indira Gandhi was to have complete state control over banks and to nationalize it. So on 17th of July, the uh, the Prime Minister dropped Morarji Desai as the Finance Minister, and on 18th July 1969, Morarji Desai resigned as the Deputy Prime Minister. And on 19th July 1969, the Vice President, who was the acting president at that time, B. Giri, promulgated the Banking Companies Acquisition and Transfer of Undertaking Ordinance 1969, nationalizing 14 banks which are having deposits exceeding rupees 50 crores. So this was done in a very clandestine manner without giving any information to anyone in extreme secrecy 14 banks overnight were acquired and were made nationalized, and their directors would have to vacate their offices. Entire undertaking would vest with the central government, and the employees would be continued as the employees of the nationalized banks. But the banks who were doing very good, the banks who were paying dividends to shareholders, were giving profits of around 10% to the shareholders, were taken over overnight, and the entire undertaking was now made a nationalized undertaking. So the banks which were nationalized were the Bank of Baroda, the Central Bank of India, Dena Bank, Indian Bank, United Commercial Bank, Bank of India, Bank of Maharashtra, Canara, Indian Bank, Indian Overseas Bank, etc., which are also all nationalized banks even today. So all these banks were originally private companies run by private directors having shareholders, were public companies. So they were overnight taken over and made nationalized. So this was the manner in which it was done by way of a ordinance was also highly objectionable, because this ordinance was passed on 19th of July 1969, when the parliament was to come in session in the monsoon session on 21st July 1969. So 2 days prior to the parliament coming in session, an ordinance was passed. The president does have the power to pass an ordinance, but that is under circumstances wherein he has to take immediate action and when the parliament is not in session. So this was not a case that the parliament was not going to be in session, or this could not have been debated in the parliament, and a proper view could have been taken from all the legislatures, and then a proper act could be passed. But overnight, this was done in a very clandestine and secret manner. And that was the objection of the directors and shareholders. And therefore, on 21st July 1969 itself, a petition came to be filed before the Supreme Court, challenging the validity of this ordinance and the manner in which it was passed by the then government. During the pendency of the petition, as the petition was obviously challenging the action of the president in issuing an ordinance when in 2 days' time the parliament was going to come in session, the bill was placed before the parliament, and then the parliament passed an act of 1969 nationalizing these banks. So during the pendency of the petition, the act was passed. So the Supreme Court at that time did not go into the question whether the president had the power to promulgate an ordinance when the parliament was coming into session. But the shareholder, who was R.C. Cooper, Rustamji Kawasji Cooper, had filed this petition through a very eminent lawyer, Mr. Nani Palkhiwala. And Nani Palkhiwala was the lead counsel in this matter, and he's a doyen of the bar and one of the most respected lawyers this country has produced. And he argued this matter, and he said that this act, the manner in which it was laid down or passed, was absolutely objectionable and was not within the purview of the president. But since the act was later on enacted by the legislature, that argument was dropped, and the Supreme Court said, since it is an act, we will decide the validity of the act. So the other disturbing features of this act were the manner in which the compensation was to be paid. So how the banks were to be paid compensation was to be decided by a tribunal or by an agreement between the directors and the state government. And the compensation that was to be determined by the tribunal was to be paid in marketable central government securities, which would be paid after 10 years. So your undertaking, entire private undertaking, has been taken over, nationalized, and you will get compensation not in cash or in check immediately, but after a period of 10 years, and that through government securities. So this was highly objectionable, and obviously it would have to be tested under the touchstone of fundamental right to property, as it then stood under the constitution, and the right of the state to acquire under the doctrine of eminent domain. So these were the challenges which the act faced before the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court decided on several issues. But the most important issues that the Supreme Court decided in this case was that the shareholder, and this has to be understood because none of the banks who were nationalized challenged this action of the government before the Supreme Court. A shareholder came forward and said that my right to property is violated, and therefore you declare this act to be ultra vires. So the Union government at that time objected that how a shareholder can come forward before the Supreme Court when the banks itself or even the directors have not come before the Supreme Court. And what locus does a shareholder have? So the Supreme Court says that yes, his right to property was violated and therefore he was entitled to file a petition before the Supreme Court, as he would be losing, substantially losing on his investment, and he would be also losing his right to receive the dividend, and therefore his right to property, because property basically is not just an immovable property. Property can be tangible as well as intangible and movable as well as immovable. So your assets in your bank is also your property, and therefore losing that property, as shareholders would not be getting anything when the banks were nationalized, certainly amounted to violation of his right to property, and therefore a shareholder was also entitled to file a petition before the Supreme Court. The second important aspect of this judgment was with respect to the act being violative of Article 19(1)(f) and 31(2), that is the protection guaranteed to citizens of having a right to property. And also important was the doctrine of mutual exclusivity, which was overruled by this judgment in the year 1970, when Supreme Court had in the year 1950 in the judgment of A.K. Gopalan held that fundamental rights were isolated silos, and if one fundamental right is violated, you cannot say the other is also violated. And this doctrine of mutual exclusivity was coming in the way of giving fundamental right its true meaning. And this judgment in 1970 laid that these fundamental rights are have a common thread, and they are not exclusive to each other. They run a common thread, they have a common theme, and they protect the fundamental rights, the liberty of individuals fully and to all extent. So therefore, this was a very important decision with respect to overruling of the theory of mutual exclusivity. This held that a shareholder can also file a petition, and this also held that compensation word which was used under Article 31 of the Constitution meant that a just and equitable compensation had to be paid when the property was to be expropriated by the state under the principle of eminent domain. So, this principle of the Supreme Court was extremely important and laid down a very, very good law for the Supreme Court, and was a and and clear cut message to the Parliament that you cannot acquire property without giving just compensation. So therefore, this was a very important judgment of that time and laid down a very good law, which is still today a good law and has been upheld and followed in several decisions. This judgment was given by 11 judges of the Supreme Court who had decided this matter, and 10 judges of the Supreme Court in one voice declared this act to be unconstitutional. So therefore, this was a major decision of that time and laid down a very good principle of law.
So, Jeet, most of us have lived in the era when there was, the government banks. In fact, when I was a small, student in class 6th or 7th, I opened my student account in PNB. That was my first account. And that was a time when we have not seen the private sector banks. So, most of us used to queue up, and there used to be a man trap outside every bank with two chains. So, I think those memories are still very ripe. But the funny part is that the government of India has gone complete circle, and when they were acquiring these banks, it looked like sort of a dictatorial method of acquiring these banks, and now we are now doing probably the government of India feels that whatever they did in 50s and 60s was wrong, so now they want to privatize these banks again. So it's a very big deal. What do you think was the reason behind taking such a measure by Government of India for taking over all the private sector banks which were thriving and making money?
Yes, because at that time, even the larger public believed that socialism was the way forward for India, and having state control over private enterprise was the best way to ensure that the greatest benefits reaches the greatest number of people. And it was also believed that private enterprises always look for their profit and not for the good of the people. And this was the policy and philosophy which was prevalent at that time. But as experience showed that from 1950 onwards, the state ultimately led to statism, and it could not thrive or develop or give that opportunity to the people. And so 1991, there was an economic failure, and ultimately we had to succumb to international pressure, and ultimately we liberalized our economy in 1991 onwards. And thereafter, we've seen that giving private enterprise a free hold and allowing them to run in a regulated manner would certainly benefit the overall economy and also give opportunities to the people which were otherwise not available. So ultimately, these are all economic philosophies which we believed at that time, and then now ultimately we've given up. And so now we see a full circle, and we see that even public sector banks, even public sector undertakings are being privatized, and some part of their stake is given to private sector, because we've seen private sector grow exponentially from 1991. So certainly these are all economic philosophies, and with time, time tested methods, we've seen its benefits, and now therefore these measures are taken. So with time, everything has to change, and so Constitution itself permits, as it is a living document, to have philosophies of the time which are prevalent, and therefore even the Supreme Court in 60s, 70s did not say that your economic policies are bad, or we seek over judgment or in appeal to decide your economic policies. You can go ahead with the economic policies, but what you have to ensure is that you must not violate the fundamental rights which are sacrosanct, which are superior to all other rights given under the Constitution, and therefore there is a duty on the state to ensure that the guarantees and the fundamental rights are not violated or abridged. So these are the only limitations which are prescribed. Otherwise, the government has a free hand with respect to economic policies. It can choose whatever policy it finds best.
So, Jeet, I think the Supreme Court with 11 judge bench ruled against the government, and yet Government of India went ahead and acquired all these banks. How did they do that? I think let's move ahead from the judgment, because this judgment happened in 69, but I think subsequently Government of India went ahead and acquired PNB and all different banks and make them public sector undertaking. How did they manage to do that?
Yes, so certainly the Supreme Court held the amount of compensation was to be paid to be bad, and therefore declared the act to be void. So by way of this judgment, the government had to pay up another amount of rupees 85 crore to the banks in order to acquire. But what the government also did and acted was to change the constitution, as the parliament believed that it had the supreme powers to change the constitution at its whims and fancies, and it deleted the word compensation from Article 31(2) and replaced it with the word amount, because the Supreme Court had interpreted the word compensation to mean a just and equitable amount to be paid for the property owner whose property rights were to be expropriated. But since this word itself was deleted and was replaced by a word amount, the government had a free hand and a free hold to acquire property and to give any amount, not a reasonable and just amount. So this is how they manipulated, and what the greatest lawyer, the Justice Mr. Nani Palkhiwala, said that the constitution was defaced and defiled. He used very strong words to say that our constitution was constantly defaced and defiled in those times, and the constitutional important doctrines were completely thrown away in the 60s and 70s. And therefore, ultimately, the judgment of Keshwanand Bharti, which was one of the most important judgments, which saved India from becoming an autocratic country or a one state ruled, one party ruled state. So ultimately, we have to thank the judges of the Supreme Court and their wisdom that we have a wonderful constitution that is still today protected. Otherwise, the parliament had tried to deface and defile it several times before, which it cannot do it now.
So, Jeet, I think this is very, very interesting. I mean, the last few comments from you are absolutely in sync with, what general public feel and what was going on and how it was getting misused. In fact, I mean, it's so interesting to learn from you that, the proper use of English, you can change the law itself. It is not in favor of the government. So I think that is one point. And second is that, personally, as a global professional, I've seen many governments doing that. Let's look at Royal Bank of Scotland, RBS, when they went into a troublesome time, uh, government of UK actually pumped in billions of pounds sterling. I think if I remember the actual amount correctly, it was 400 billion pounds into RBS just to revive it. So they have actually gone ahead and acquired that bank, and it has now become a public sector undertaking in UK. Similarly, if you look at the Australian ANZ bank, which is an Australian government bank, but the funny part is that the government has minority stake there, and the Chinese government has a majority stake. So these are the games that each governments are playing. Uh, Fortunately for our government of the day today, they feel that the private public partnership is the way forward, and hence they are trying to correct whatever wrongs were done in 50s and 60s. They are trying to privatize some of the banks, not all of the banks, but some of the banks on those things.
Well, yes, yes, experience, we can only learn through experience. So you will say that 50s, 60s decisions were wrong, but that did not give much result. Ultimately, it was an attempt, and rightly so, because we have seen imperialism, we have seen the colonial rule, and how free market led to this imperialism. And therefore, at that time, India, and in fact, the majority believed that socialism was the way forward, the Fabian socialism policy. So I wouldn't say it was wrong at that time, but it ultimately did not give results. So we had to give it away. And now this public-private partnership, if it works for the country, if it gives opportunities to the citizens, then I think it should be explored now.
So, Jeet, it was a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you for finding time and discussing this very important historical judgment which happened in '69, which was passed by Supreme Court. And it was really pleasure to learn few things like changing the word from compensation to amount and stuff like that. It is very interesting. So thank you so much. We will catch up in the next episode of Legal Matters. Until then, I like to say goodbye for today.
Thank you very much for having me, Chandra. Goodbye.